Okay, as an orthopedic surgeon, these are the things I would do if I wanted to bulletproof my joints so that they lasted me a lifetime. Why is this important? First of all, I spent years and years and years operating on people's knees and shoulders and hips and so on and so forth. And so I've had the experience of seeing inside of thousands and thousands of joints. I've seen a lot of damage and a lot of wear. And we'll talk about why that occurs and what you can do to prevent it. Now, why is it important? Well, obviously, we want to maintain our capacity to move, our ability to move through space comfortably, quickly, because not only is it a better quality of life, but it also protects our heart, lungs, and brain. Because you think about it, a car with a nice engine ain't going nowhere with flat tires, right? So we want to make sure that our chassis, our frame, our structure, our joints, our muscles are working well so that we can continue to provide the stimulation which is good for our heart, lungs, and then of course of our brain. I learned later in life, my orthopedic training didn't teach me this, but this is something I've come to accept as pretty clear evidence. What we put in our mouth affects the health of our joints. And it's not just about being obese. Now, certainly this is a problem. If you have too much excess body fat, it is very inflammatory and it is damaging to our joints. Inflammatory cytokines are elicited by and through fat cells, which also affect the quality of the joint. They lead to increasing inflammation and damage in there. Some of you guys may be old enough to remember the old Special K commercial where they implored and asked people if they could, quote unquote, pinch more than an inch. So they'd reach down and grab their belly, and if they could grab more than an inch of belly fat, that was considered a problem. And I think that's a pretty good metric. So if you can pinch more than an inch of belly fat, you got work to do. That excess belly fat is going to contribute to not only poor joint health, but also dementia, obesity, cancer, diabetes, and so on and so forth. So take care of that belly fat, okay? That's really, really important. Okay, so the next thing we need to talk about is diet itself directly. What are we eating? What are we consuming, and how is it affecting us? And now, one of the biggest differentiators between a young joint and an old joint is how much glycation has occurred, how much sugar has attached itself to the various proteins, and particularly the cartilage in the joint. And what is driving that is what is going on with what we put in our mouth. And so one of the biggest drivers of glycation and glycemic excursion is the consumption of particularly ultra-processed carbohydrates. So these are your flours, your sugars, your hyper-ultra-processed foods that are primarily carbohydrate-based. These things are a disaster for your joints. So we want to avoid those, minimize those as much as possible. Like I said, not everybody needs to be on a carnivore diet, but certainly we see people on carnivore diets seeing dramatic improvements in their joint health. And I think this is, there's no mystery as to why that may be occurring. Okay, so now one of the other things that seems to drive glycation is also oxidized fats in the body. These types of things, which again are everywhere in the modern diet. Anytime you're eating packaged processed foods, you're probably being dosed significant amounts. In fact, the average American consumes more calories in soybean oil than they do from all the meat they ever eat in their diet. We need to probably remove those from the diet as well. And again, we see people that remove those types of food, and once again, their joint health seems to improve significantly. Health of our joints is not predicated on not using them and just avoiding any kind of activity. In fact, the exact opposite is true. Looking in lots and lots of knees with an arthroscope, getting in there with a camera and looking around the knee, one of the most common areas that we see that the cartilage starts to wear out is in the very back deep pockets of the back of the knee. Well, that is the area where the knee is exposed to the most pressure in a deep squat, right? So does that mean that deep squatting is causing the knees to wear out? No, it's actually the opposite, because so few people actually spend much time in a deep squat position, particularly in Western society, that because the cartilage is not experiencing any stress, it sort of just crumbles away from disuse, right? So we want to use the cartilage. We want to apply some pressure to the cartilage to keep it robust and thick and strong. It responds to the stimulation around. Just like our muscles atrophy when we don't use them, the same thing occurs when our cartilage is not being utilized. So when you look at some of these cultures where squatting is still pretty normal, they tend to have less knee arthritis. And that's, I think, a significant fact that you should pay attention to. Okay, so now if I wanted to fix, or protect my cartilage, again, I would use it, and I would use it in a way which I experience full range of motion through my joints. And something like what's called deep tier plyometrics are a very good technique to start to develop this. And again, this is something that you have to work your way into. But I think using a little bit of velocity with motion, a little bit of load is actually going to be, one of the good benefits, one of the ways to benefit your joints in a very positive way. Some people have heard the phrase that motion is the lotion. If we continually use our joints, it's not wearing them out. What it's doing is providing the stimulation so that cartilage remains healthy and intact, and that, we stimulate the chondrocytes, the cells that make up the cartilage, to continue to stay there and be in place. One of the things, again, that predicts the health of a joint is the stability of the joint. The actual structure of the joint kind of dictates some of the stability of there. Our hip is buried in a deep socket, and it's a pretty stable joint, whereas our shoulder is in a very shallow socket. You can't really change the natural shape of the joint, but what you can do, and some of the things that provide what we call dynamic stability, are the soft tissue structures that surround the joint, the muscles or ligaments and tendons. And those things are all subject to improvement through strength training and exercise. And so I would look at things like isometric exercise, particularly yielding isometrics, where you might have a joint held in position with a modest weight there that you hold until you get to fatigue. And those things will have beneficial effects to the surrounding tendons, to the ligaments, and then, of course, strengthening the joints themselves. So getting in there and getting stronger. And there's lots of ways you can do that. I think it's important to strengthen the joints throughout its range of motion. So even in the most flexed positions, the most extended position, these positions that you may not find yourself regular in, you need to be stronger in those positions so that those joints, when they do happen to go in those positions, can do it in a controlled, very balanced fashion. When we get injured, a lot of times what happens is we don't have the strength to prevent that uncontrolled, unbalanced, unstable joint motion that occurs, and it results in a ligament tear or a cartilage injury, or perhaps in the knee joint, for instance, a meniscus tear, or in the shoulder, a labral tear. Okay, let's just say you're kind of an older person and maybe your joints are already kind of worn out. What do you do in this situation? Well, I think you can still improve the overall health of your joint. And the first thing I would do, again, is start looking at my diet. It's hard to do these sort of exercise variations when you're not feeling good, you don't have any energy, everything's inflamed, everything hurts. So we got to address our diet. We've got to address our overall lifestyle, sleep, stress, exposure to light, before we can really start engaging in exercises that are going to help us with our joints. And so one thing I would say, if you are someone that finds yourself, with achy joints, a little older and a little bit overweight, and you need help, check out what we're doing at Revero. We are taking folks just like that every single day. I literally meet with all of our patients, or that opportunity is there. I have meetings every week, several times a week, so I can talk to the patients, help them with this. You get a physician that understands, help you and work with you to come off medications, to improve your nutrition, your lifestyle, and then a dedicated coaching team that will pester you, nag you, keep you accountable, motivate you, answer your questions, be there for you on a daily basis if that's what's needed. So if that's something that sounds interesting to you, check out what we're doing at Revero.com. We are changing the way healthcare is done for the better. Thank you all for supporting us. If there's any questions or comments, let me know in the comments.